What happens when the legendary Winter Soldier is suddenly thrown into the world of My Hero Academia? In a society where quirks determine power and pro-heroes are celebrities, Bucky Barnes has something completely different. Decades of combat experience, a vibranium arm, and the instincts of a trained super soldier. But when the Hero Public Safety Commission discovers a mysterious quirkless fighter capable of taking down villains in seconds, they realize Bucky isn't just an outsider. He's an anomaly, and they may want to turn him into their greatest weapon. What happens when the Winter Soldier goes up against the heroes and villains of MHA? Let's find out. The transition wasn't a flash of light or a heroic summons. It was the sickening lurch of a stomach-turning vacuum, the smell of ozone and burnt copper, and then the bone-chilling dampness of a rainy alleyway in a city that tasted of salt and smog. James Buchanan Barnes, the man the world had once screamed for as the Winter Soldier, didn't land on his feet. He crashed into a pile of discarded trash, his vibranium arm sparking as it scraped against a rusted dumpster. He was a ghost out of time, a weapon with a fractured soul, and as he stood up, the neon glow of the skyline above him felt like a fever dream. The billboards didn't show politicians or brands he recognized. They showed men in spandex capes with impossible proportions, smiling with a curated corporate perfection that made his skin crawl. This wasn't New York. This wasn't even his Earth. This was a world where hero was a trademark, and power was a regulated commodity. Hosu City was still recovering from the scars of the hero killer, Stain, but the atmosphere remained thick with a performative sense of security. Bucky adjusted his tactical vest, his thumb tracing the cold line of a combat knife. He was at 70% capacity. His arm was functioning. His super soldier physiology was intact, but his mind was a jagged map of Hydra trigger words and fragmented memories. He moved through the shadows with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 70 years being a nightmare. He watched a pro-hero in a garish yellow bodysuit struggle to apprehend a petty thief with a minor mutation. The thief's fingers were elongated like needles, but the hero was too busy checking his reflection in a storefront window to notice the incoming strike. It was pathetic. It was a circus. To Bucky, who had traded blood for inches in the trenches of World War II and the Black Ops corridors of the Cold War, this looked like a child playing with a loaded gun. The thief lunged, his needle fingers aiming for the hero's throat. The pro panicked, his quirk, a minor kinetic blast, fizzling out because his heart rate was too high. He wasn't a soldier. He was a celebrity in a costume. Before the needle could break skin, Bucky moved. He didn't scream a catchphrase. He didn't announce his arrival. He was just a blur of dark leather and dull metal. His vibranium hand caught the thief's wrist with a sickening crack of bone. With a fluid, brutal efficiency, Bucky swept the man's legs out from under him and drove a knee into his solar plexus, pinning him to the asphalt in 3 seconds flat. The hero stared, mouth agape, as Bucky stood over the unconscious criminal. "Call the police," Bucky said, his voice a low, raspy growl that hadn't been used for anything but tactical commands in weeks. "Who? What's your hero ID?" the costumed man stammered, reaching for a scanner on his belt. "I didn't see a quirk signature. You're quirkless? You can't just interfere with a licensed apprehension." "That's a violation of the Hero Public Safety Act." Bucky looked at the man, really looked at him. He saw the fear, the incompetence, and the heavy reliance on a system that prioritized paperwork over people. "I don't have an ID," Bucky replied, his eyes cold and hollow. "And I don't have a quirk. Just have a mission." He turned and melted into the darkness of the alley before the hero could even register his movement. But Bucky wasn't as invisible as he thought. High above the street, hidden behind the glare of a massive digital clock, a series of high-altitude surveillance drones flickered. Their lenses zoomed in on the silver star on Bucky's shoulder. Back at the headquarters of the Hero Public Safety Commission, HPSC, a red alert flashed across a technician's screen. A quirkless individual had just neutralized a Tier B threat in under 4 seconds using unauthorized cybernetics and military-grade combat techniques. In a society built on the rigid hierarchy of quirks, Bucky Barnes was an anomaly. And the Commission didn't like anomalies. They liked assets. The Winter Soldier had arrived in a world of symbols, and he was about to remind them all that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the room isn't the man who can fly, but the man who has nothing left to lose. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, Hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Some things can't be fixed. Inside the central hub of the Hero Public Safety Commission, the air was conditioned to a sterile, scentless chill. This was the room where the narrative of Japan was curated, where the messy reality of superhuman violence was polished into the shiny, digestible product sold to the masses on the evening news. On a massive curved monitor that spanned the width of the wall, the grainy footage of the Hosu alleyway played on a loop. It was enhanced, stabilized, and slowed down to a fraction of its original speed. At the center of the frame was the man with the metal arm. A woman in a sharp gray suit stood with her arms crossed, her eyes reflecting the flickering blue light of the screen. Her name was Madam President, and she didn't look at the heroes on the screen. She looked at the statistics. Biometric scan results? She asked, her voice like the clicking of a typewriter. 0 matches, ma'am. A technician replied without looking up from his console. We've cross-referenced the National Quirk Registry, the criminal database, and even international Interpol files. He doesn't exist. No birth certificate, no school records, no dental. We ran a thermal analysis of his arm. It's not a quirk-based manifestation. It's advanced cybernetics. Materials unknown. It doesn't put off the heat signature of standard Japanese or American prosthetics. And the way he moves... The technician paused, shivering. He's not using a quirk. His muscle fibers are firing at a rate that should be physically impossible for a quirkless human, yet there's no quirk factor radiation detected in the area. He's a biological and technological anomaly. Madam President leaned in closer. She watched the way Bucky Barnes moved. The economy of motion. The way he didn't even look at the man he was breaking. He didn't hesitate, she whispered. He didn't look for a camera. He didn't even check to see if the pro-hero was all right. He neutralized the threat and disappeared. This isn't a vigilante looking for fame. This is a professional. In the world of My Hero Academia, a professional was someone with a license, a costume, and a PR team. But in the secret history of the HPSC, a professional was something else entirely. They remembered Lady Nagant. They remembered the bodies buried under the foundation of the Symbol of Peace's pedestal. The commission thrived on control, and a man who could outperform a licensed pro-hero without a quirk was a direct threat to the social order they had spent decades constructing. If the public realized that a quirkless man with a metal arm and a century's worth of trauma could do the job better than their idols, the entire hierarchy would begin to crumble. He's a ghost, Madam President concluded. And ghosts need to be laid to rest, or recruited. Dispatch a specialized retrieval team. Not the ones with the capes. I want the ones who know how to keep their mouths shut. 3 miles away, in a cramped, one-room apartment above a noodle shop, Bucky Barnes sat on the floor, his back against the only wall without a window. He had spent the last 6 hours stripping and cleaning his gear. The Vibranium arm was humming, a low, melodic vibration that felt like a heartbeat against his shoulder. He had scavenged a radio, listening to the chatter of the city. It was nauseating. Every station was talking about hero rankings, quirk marriage scandals, and the latest toy line for a hero named Mount Lady. Bucky closed his eyes, and for a second, he wasn't in Hosu. He was in a Siberian bunker, the smell of freezing coolant filling his lungs as the Hydra scientists prepared the chair. Longing, rusted, 17. He shook his head, the metal fingers of his left hand digging into his thigh until the fabric of his tactical pants tore. He was still in there. The soldier was still lurking under the surface, waiting for the right sequence of words to turn him back into a puppet. He had come to this world to escape the shadow of his past, but he was starting to realize that this society was just a different kind of cage. In his world, Hydra hid in the shadows. In this world, the system of control wore a bright yellow cape and a winning smile. His internal alarm, honed by decades of being hunted, went off. The air in the room changed, a subtle shift in pressure. Someone was on the roof. Someone else was in the hallway, their footsteps too light to be a civilian, too rhythmic to be a random tenant. Bucky didn't reach for his gun. He reached for his mask. He pulled the black ballistic fabric over his face, his eyes turning into 2 cold, unblinking slits. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't need them. He moved to the center of the room, standing perfectly still, becoming the shadow. The door didn't burst open. It dissolved. A hero known as Cellophane didn't come through the door, but 3 men in black tactical gear with HPSC insignias did. They weren't there to talk. One of them raised a hand, and a gout of fast-hardening cement sprayed from his palms, aiming to encase Bucky's legs. Bucky didn't dodge. He intercepted. He swung the vibranium arm in a wide arc, the metal shattering the stream of cement mid-air. The impact sent a shockwave through the room, blowing out the windows. Before the agents could recalibrate, Bucky was among them. He wasn't fighting like a hero, he was fighting like a machine. He caught the first agent by the throat, using him as a human shield against a volley of tranquilizer darts. With a flick of his wrist, he sent a combat knife whistling through the air, pinning the second agent's hand to the wall by his sleeve. The third agent lunged, his quirk allowing him to increase the density of his skin until he was like a walking statue of granite. He swung a heavy fist at Bucky's head. Bucky didn't flinch. He caught the stone fist in his metal palm. The sound of vibranium meeting hardened quirk skin was like a sledgehammer hitting an anvil. Bucky squeezed. The agent screamed as his invincible hand began to crack under the relentless mechanical pressure of the Winter Soldier's grip. "Who sent you?" Bucky asked, his voice muffled by the mask but vibrating with a terrifying intensity. The Commission," the agent gasped, dropping to his knees. "You're an unregistered, you're a danger to public safety." Bucky looked at the man, and for a moment, he saw a Hydra Strike team member. He saw the same blind obedience, the same belief that they were the good guys. Because they had a badge and a mandate, he felt a surge of cold, familiar rage. He could kill them all in seconds. He could snap their necks and disappear before the local police even arrived. The Winter Soldier wanted to. The Winter Soldier knew that dead men didn't follow you. But Bucky Barnes pulled back. He released the man's hand and kicked him across the room. He grabbed his bag and vaulted through the shattered window, plummeting 3 stories toward the alleyway below. He hit the ground in a 3-point landing, the impact absorbed by his enhanced joints. He knew now that he wasn't just a ghost, he was a target. The heroes of this world weren't going to leave him alone until he was either a weapon in their arsenal or a body in their morgue. As he ran into the rain, he saw a giant holographic display of the #1 hero, Endeavor, towering over the city. The man was engulfed in flames, his expression one of arrogant, burning pride. Bucky realized then that he couldn't hide. In a world of fire, a ghost has to become a storm. The rain didn't just fall in Hosu, it hissed. It turned to steam the moment it touched the pavement of the industrial district on the city's outskirts. Bucky Barnes stood atop a rusted shipping container, his breathing shallow and rhythmic, his eyes scanning the horizon. He didn't need a quirk to sense the change in the atmosphere. The temperature was rising, the humidity was thickening into a choking fog, and the air began to smell of ozone and charcoal. He had been running for 3 hours, weaving through the labyrinth of the city's underbelly, but the HPSC had deep pockets and even deeper surveillance. They hadn't sent more tactical teams. They had sent a statement. A streak of orange light cut through the midnight sky, a literal comet of screaming flame that slammed into the center of the shipyard with the force of a tectonic shift. The shockwave knocked several containers off their stacks, the screeching of twisting metal echoing through the empty lots. As the fire dissipated, the silhouette of a man emerged from the inferno. He was massive, his broad shoulders draped in a costume that seemed forged from the sun itself. Flames licked at his mask and beard, and his presence turned the cold night into a furnace. Endeavor, the #1 hero. The man who had spent his entire life in the shadow of a god, only to inherit a throne of ash when that god retired. "Unlicensed vigilante, identify yourself." Endeavor's voice wasn't a request. It was a roar that vibrated in Bucky's marrow. "The Commission has labeled you a grade S threat to public order. Submit now, or be purged." Bucky didn't answer. To him, this wasn't a hero, it was a soup. He saw the same narcissistic flare he'd seen in the eyes of every high-ranking officer who thought their uniform gave them the right to play God. He dropped from the container, landing silently in the shadows. He didn't have a quirk to power up, no flashy transformation to signal his intent. He just checked the magazine of his sidearm, loaded with non-lethal high-impact rounds, and tightened the straps on his vibranium arm. "I'm not looking for a fight," Bucky said, his voice carrying through the steam. "I'm just trying to leave. Tell your handlers at the Commission to back off." Endeavor scoffed, a plume of fire erupting from his nostrils. "Leave? You've assaulted government agents and operated outside the law in a city still mourning its peace. You are a cancer on this society, quirkless or not." If you will not submit, you will burn. The hero didn't wait for a rebuttal. He lunged, a jet of flame erupting from his heels to propel him forward like a missile. He swung a massive, flaming fist, the Flashfire Fist, aiming to end the encounter in a single, overwhelming display of force. Bucky didn't retreat. He moved with the terrifying, preternatural speed of the super soldier serum. He dove forward, rolling beneath the arc of Endeavor's punch. The heat was blistering, singing the hair on the back of Bucky's neck, but he was already up, his metal arm blurring as it slammed into Endeavor's ribs. The sound was like a car crash. The Vibranium didn't just strike, it absorbed the kinetic energy of Endeavor's momentum and redirected it. The number one hero gasped as the air was forced from his lungs, his flames flickering for a fraction of a second. He stumbled back, shock written across his face. A quirkless man had just landed a blow that felt like a hit from All Might. What are you? Endeavor growled, his flames intensifying until the shipping containers nearby began to glow dull red. A guy who's had a very long century, Bucky replied. He pulled a series of small spherical devices from his belt, tactical flashbangs combined with aerosolized fire-suppressant foam. He tossed them in a tight spread. Endeavor swiped them away with a wave of fire, but that was the trap. The heat triggered the canisters prematurely, creating a massive cloud of chemical foam and blinding white light. Endeavor roared, blinded and suffocated by the suppressing agent. He began to blast fire in every direction, a desperate attempt to clear the air, but Bucky was already moving through the whiteout. He wasn't using a quirk. He was using geometry and sound. He knew where Endeavor was by the hiss of his flames. Bucky appeared from the side, his vibranium fist connecting with Endeavor's jaw. Then a sweep of the leg, then a palm strike to the solar plexus. It was a masterclass in CQC. Close quarters combat designed to take down opponents twice his size and 10 times his power. Endeavor, used to overwhelming his enemies with sheer output, found himself fighting a ghost who was inside his guard, before he could even ignite a spark. You rely too much on the fire, Bucky hissed, grabbing Endeavor's wrist and twisting it into a joint lock that sent the giant hero to one knee. You're loud. You're bright. You're a target. Endeavor's eyes bulged. The humiliation was worse than the pain. To be touched, to be manipulated like a trainee by a man without a quirk signature, was an insult to everything he had sacrificed his humanity for. Get off me. A massive explosion of heat, a prominence burn on a localized scale, erupted from Endeavor's entire body. The shockwave sent Bucky flying backward, his tactical suit smoking. He hit a brick wall 40 feet away, the impact cratering the masonry. Bucky groaned, his vision swimming. The super soldier serum kept his bones from shattering, but the heat was beginning to cook him inside his gear. Endeavor stood in the center of a circle of molten asphalt, his breath coming in ragged heaves. He looked less like a hero and more like a demon. You are skilled, I will grant you that. But skill is nothing against the sun. You have no quirk. You are a relic of a weaker age. Die knowing that your mission ends here. He raised both hands, the air shimmering as he prepared a final, incinerating blast. But as the fire gathered, a purple blur streaked through the air. A feathered blade, sharp as a diamond and moving at terminal velocity, sliced through the air between the two men, embedding itself in the ground. Now, number one. A casual, melodic voice drifted down from the top of a nearby crane. The commission said retrieval, not cremation. You start melting the shipping docks, and I'm the one who has to do the paperwork. Bucky looked up, his hand hovering over his combat knife. Perched on the edge of the crane was a man with large, crimson wings and a bored expression. Hawks, the number 2 hero. Unlike Endeavor, Hawks wasn't burning with rage. He was watching Bucky with a sharp, predatory curiosity. He's dangerous, Hawks, Endeavor spat, though he lowered his hands slightly. He's an unregistered combatant with illegal tech. He almost broke my arm. Hawks whistled, his golden eyes locking onto Bucky's metal one. Almost broke Endeavor's arm without a quirk? Damn, that's a headline. He hopped down, his wings flared out to slow his descent, landing gracefully between the two combatants. He looked at Bucky and smiled, a sharp, insincere smile that reminded Bucky of every intelligence officer he'd ever worked for. Hey there, Terminator. My bosses want to have a chat. They think you and I have a lot in common. You know, the whole doing the dirty work so the public can sleep thing? Bucky stood up slowly, the vibranium arm humming as it recalibrated. He was trapped between the fire and the wind. He looked at Hawks, then at the brooding, hateful Endeavor. He realized that the HPSC didn't just want him, they wanted to see if he could survive their best. "I don't work for commissions," Bucky said, his voice cold. "Oh, I think you will," Hawks replied, his feathers twitching. "Because the alternative is Endeavor finishes that punch, and I don't think you've got enough metal in that arm to stop what comes next." Bucky glanced at the shadows. He was at the limit. He could fight, or he could play the game until he found a way to burn the whole board down. He lowered his guard, but his eyes never left Hawks. The Winter Soldier knew how to survive behind enemy lines. This wasn't a surrender. It was an infiltration. The facility wasn't a prison, but to a man who had spent decades in a cryostasis tube, the distinction was academic. It was a high-security penthouse located in a skyscraper that didn't appear on any public map of Tokyo. The walls were a soft, non-reflective gray. The furniture was bolted to the floor, and the windows were made of reinforced polycarbonate, capable of withstanding a direct hit from a tank shell. It was a gilded cage, designed by people who understood that the most dangerous birds don't need bars. They need a reason to stay. Bucky Barnes sat on the edge of the bed, his vibranium arm resting heavily on his knee. He had been stripped of his tactical vest and his weapons, replaced with a simple black compression shirt and trousers. He looked at his metal hand, the sunlight from the floor-to-ceiling window glinting off the dull polish. He could feel the cameras, tiny, microscopic lenses embedded in the ceiling tiles, tracking his pulse, his pupil dilation, and the minute tremors in his flesh. The door slid open with a whisper of hydraulics. Hawks walked in, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee and a bag of takeout. He wasn't wearing his usual visor, and his crimson wings were tucked tightly against his back, making him look smaller, almost human. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a weary office worker at the end of a double shift. "Double espresso for the man who punched the #1 hero in the jaw," Hawks said, tossing a cup toward Bucky. Bucky caught it with his right hand, his eyes never leaving Hawks's face. "Relax, Barnes. If we wanted you dead, we would have let Endeavor finish his supernova routine. Or we would have gassed this room an hour ago. We're in the getting-to-know-you phase of the relationship." Hawks sat in the chair opposite Bucky, leaning back with a casualness that was entirely manufactured. He took a sip of his own coffee and exhaled a long, shaky breath. "You've caused quite a stir, you know. The president of the commission hasn't slept in 36 hours. They're calling you the Quirkless Wonder, or the Ghost of Hosu. Me? I just think you're a guy who's been through the ringer." "You're a handler," Bucky said, his voice flat. "I've had dozens. They all start with coffee and a let's be friends speech. It usually ends with a chair and a brain wipe." Hawks paused, the cup halfway to his lips. His golden eyes sharpened, the playful facade dropping for a microsecond. "Is that what they did to you, back where you came from?" He shook his head, looking out the window at the sprawling metropolis below. "Look, I'm not going to lie to you. This society is built on a very specific set of rules. You have a quirk, you get a license, you follow the script. Everyone's happy, everyone's safe. But there are things that don't fit the script. Things that are too messy for the evening news. Like me," Bucky stated. "Like you," Hawks agreed. "And like me. You think I just fly around and save kittens from trees? I'm the commission's golden boy, because I do the things the symbols of peace won't touch. I'm the one who goes into the dark so the light stays bright." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The commission sees you as a gold mine. You're a combatant who doesn't leave a quirk signature. You can infiltrate areas where quirk detection sensors are useless. You're a ghost in a world of beacons. They want to give you a new mission, Barnes. They want to turn you into a shadow hero." Bucky felt a cold lump of familiarity settle in his stomach. It was the same pitch. Hydra wanted to save the world from its own chaos. SHIELD wanted to protect the peace. The HPSC wanted to maintain the status quo. Different names, same machinery. They didn't want a hero. They wanted a deniable asset. They wanted a Winter Soldier who wore a badge instead of a mask. "I'm done being a weapon," Bucky said, his metal fingers curling into a fist. "Are you?" Hawks challenged, his wings twitching. "Because from where I'm sitting, you don't know how to be anything else. I saw you in that shipyard. You didn't just fight Endeavor, you dismantled him. You enjoyed the efficiency of it. You're a predator in a world of prey, Barnes. If you walk out that door without the Commission's protection, Endeavor will hunt you down just to prove he can. The police will treat you like a villain. The League of Villains will try to recruit you as a martyr. You're an anomaly. And in this world, anomalies get erased. Bucky stood up, his height and presence suddenly filling the room. He walked to the window, looking down at the tiny cars and the millions of people who believed their world was protected by noble paragons of justice. He saw the billboard for All Might, the retired god, and the smaller, more aggressive ads for the new era of heroes. It was all a lie. It was a corporate-sponsored delusion. "Tell me about the girl," Bucky said suddenly. Hawks blinked. "What girl?" "The one who came before me. The one who did your shadow work, and then disappeared. I saw the way the president looked at the footage of me. She wasn't surprised. She was nostalgic." Hawks went very still. His feathers didn't rustle, they froze. The silence in the room became heavy, thick with the weight of state secrets. "Her name was Lady Nagant," Hawks said quietly. "She was the best. She believed in the mission until the mission asked her to kill too many good people to protect the Great Peace. She's in Tartarus now. A maximum security prison for the worst monsters in history. That's what happens when you say no to the commission, Barnes." Bucky turned around. "And what happens when you say yes?" "You get to live," Hawks said, his voice devoid of its earlier charm. "And you get to make sure the world doesn't burn. We have a situation. A group called the League of Villains is gaining traction. They're using a drug called Trigger to boost Quirks, and they're starting to move in circles that involve international smuggling. We think there's a link between their tech and the dimensional breach that brought you here. If you help us find them, maybe we can find a way to get you home." It was a hook, a clever, well-placed hook. Bucky didn't believe for a second that the Commission cared about his homecoming, but he knew that the League of Villains represented the same kind of radicalized chaos that had birthed Hydra. If they were the ones who had pulled him into this reality, they were his only lead. "I won't wear a costume," Bucky said, "and I won't follow a script." Hawks smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. He reached into the bag of takeout and pulled out a small, encrypted tablet. He slid it across the table. "Deal. For now, you're my consultant. You stay in the shadows. You don't kill unless I say so, and you keep that arm hidden when you're in public. We're going to a place called Deka City. There's a rumor that a major shipment of black market tech is moving through there." Bucky picked up the tablet. He didn't look at the mission brief. He looked at Hawks. "If you try to put a leash on me, I'll break your wings." Hawks laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Get in line, Barnes. Everyone wants a piece of the wings. Just remember, in this world, everyone is wearing a leash." Most people just like the color of theirs. As Hawks turned to leave, Bucky looked back at the window. He was a soldier again. He was back in the service of a powerful entity that traded in secrets and blood. He knew he was being used, and he knew that Hawks was likely his jailer as much as his partner. But, as the vibranium arm hummed against his side, Bucky felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. He wasn't going to be their shadow hero. He was going to be the thing that lived in their shadows and watched them back. Deka City looked like a postcard for traditional Japanese urbanism. But to Bucky Barnes, it smelled like an ambush. The streets were too clean, the citizens too polite, and the local heroes too relaxed. It reminded him of the suburbs in the 1940s, a manicured facade designed to hide the rot in the cellar. He walked several paces behind Hawks, his face obscured by a low-profile hood and a high-collared jacket that hid the silver sheen of his left arm. Hawks was playing the part of the celebrity, stopping to snap selfies with fans and waving at the local patrolmen, but Bucky could see the way the hero's feathers were vibrating. Hawks was nervous. The HPSC intel said the shipment is in the sub-basement of the old textile mill on the north side. Hawks murmured into his comms, disguised as a yawn. "Local police haven't touched it. They're liberation-minded, if you catch my drift. Don't trust anyone with a badge here, Barnes." "In Deka, the law is just a suggestion. I don't trust anyone with a badge anywhere," Bucky replied. They reached the mill, a skeletal structure of rusted iron and shattered glass that loomed over the district like a headstone. Hawks took the high ground, his wings carrying him to the rafters to provide overwatch. Bucky took the shadows. He slipped through a side vent, his boots making no sound on the oil-slicked floor. The air inside was heavy with the scent of ozone and something more medicinal, the sharp chemical sting of the quirk-boosting drug, Trigger. But as Bucky descended into the sub-basement, the environment changed. The industrial grime gave way to sterile white paneling and reinforced steel doors. This wasn't a textile mill, it was a laboratory, and on the far wall, illuminated by a flickering fluorescent light, was a symbol that made the blood in Bucky's veins turn to ice. It wasn't the stylized V of Vought or the HPSC's crest. It was a skull with 6 serpentine tentacles, Hydra. A holographic interface flickered to life in the center of the room. It wasn't a person projected there, but a distorted, digitized voice. A shadow of the Red Skull's ideology, filtered through the technological madness of this new world. The dimensional rift was not an accident, Sergeant Barnes, the voice hissed. It was Giran, the League of Villains broker, his image distorted by a signal scrambler. Beside him stood Tomura Shigaraki, his pale, scarred face twitching with a manic glee. It was a harvest. When your world bled into ours, it didn't just bring you. It brought the data, a century of research into the perfect obedient soldier. No quirks, no ego, just a weapon that never dulls. Bucky lunged for the console, his vibranium arm raised to smash the hardware, but a wall of purple-black mist erupted in front of him. Kurogiri stepped out of the warp, his yellow eyes glowing with a cold, formal malice. "You are a fascinating specimen, James," Shigaraki's voice echoed through the room's speakers. "In my world, heroes are products. In your world, you were a masterpiece. But you've grown defective. You have memories. You have a conscience. That's a bug in the code. We're here to provide the patch." Bucky backed away, his hand reaching for his sidearm, but his limbs felt heavy. The air in the room was being pumped with a specific aerosolized compound, a neurotoxin designed to heighten suggestibility. His heart began to hammer against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Stop," Bucky growled, his voice cracking. "Why stop when we've found the key?" Shigaraki laughed. "The HPSC wants to make you a hero. We want to make you the truth. The truth is that everyone is a slave to something. You just need to remember your master." Then, the voice changed. It wasn't Shigaraki anymore. It was a recording, cleaned and amplified, of a man with a thick Russian accent. A man from a bunker in Siberia. A man who had died decades ago but whose ghost still lived in the back of Bucky's skull. "Longing," the voice whispered. Bucky dropped to his knees, his metal hand clawing at the floor, grooving the concrete. The word hit like a physical blow, a spike driven into the center of his prefrontal cortex. "No, shut it off. Rusted," the voice continued, relentless and cold. Bucky's vision began to blur. The sterile lab dissolved into a dark room with a red star on the wall. He could feel the cold of the cryo tank. He could feel the electricity of the chair. He tried to scream, but his jaw locked. His super soldier physiology, designed to resist torture and trauma, was being bypassed by the very code written into his DNA by Hydra's scientists. 17. Daybreak Furnace. Each word was a lock turning. Each syllable was a layer of Bucky Barnes being peeled away to reveal the cold steel core of the Winter Soldier. Up in the rafters, Hawks felt the shift. He dived toward the basement, his feathers launching like knives to clear the path. But he was met by a swarm of twice clones, an endless tide of black and gray masked men who threw themselves at him with suicidal fervor. "Barnes, get out of there!" Hawks screamed, but his voice was drowned out by the recording. 9, benign, homecoming. Bucky's right hand, his human hand, stopped trembling. It went flat against the floor. His breathing slowed until it was almost non-existent. The pain in his eyes vanished, replaced by a dull, glassy vacuum. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a system. One freight car. The voice stopped. The silence in the laboratory was absolute, broken only by the hum of the cooling fans and the distant sounds of Hawks fighting for his life above. Bucky stood up. He didn't look at the hologram. He didn't look at the Hydra symbol. He stood at perfect attention, his arms at his sides, his gaze fixed on the wall in front of him. "Ready to comply," the Winter Soldier said. His voice was a flat, tonal graveyard. Shigaraki's face appeared on the main screen, his hand scratching at his neck until it bled. "Beautiful. Look at that, Kurogiri. No quirk. No plus ultra bullshit. Just a man-shaped hole in the world. Winter Soldier, I have a mission for you. There's a man in this city. A man who thinks he's a hero. He's wearing red wings." The Winter Soldier didn't nod. He didn't blink. He simply turned and walked toward the stairs. He didn't use the elevator. He moved through the shadows of the mill, his movements no longer burdened by the hesitation of a man with a soul. He was a shark in a forest. He emerged onto the roof just as Hawks finished shredding the last of the Twice clones. Hawks landed, breathing hard, his feathers ruffled and stained with gray ink. He saw Bucky standing near the ledge, his hood down, the moon reflecting off the silver star on his shoulder. "Bucky! Thank God!" Hawks panted, retracting his wing blades. "We need to move. The League set this whole place up. It's a trap. We need to get back to the commission, and—" Hawks stopped. He saw Bucky's eyes. They weren't the eyes of the man who had shared coffee with him in the penthouse. They were the eyes of a machine calculating wind speed, trajectory, and the structural integrity of a human neck. "Barnes?" Hawks whispered, his hand drifting toward his belt. The Winter Soldier didn't speak. He lunged. The Vibranium arm moved faster than Hawks' eyes could track. The hero barely had time to flare his wings before the metal fist smashed into his chest, sending him spiraling off the roof and into the dark streets of Deka City below. The Winter Soldier didn't watch him fall. He simply vaulted over the edge, following his target into the abyss. In the world of heroes, they spoke of breaking your limits. But as the Winter Soldier plummeted toward the ground, he proved that for some, the only limit was the length of the leash. The descent into the streets of Deka City was not a fall. It was a tactical insertion. Hawks regained his bearings mid-air, his primary feathers vibrating violently as they caught the wind to arrest his spin. He looked up, expecting to see a villain leaping after him with a flashy quirk or a gloating scream. Instead, he saw a silent shadow silhouetted against the moon. Bucky Barnes didn't use wings. He used the environment. He rebounded off a fire escape, the iron groaning under his weight, and then kicked off a brick wall, his trajectory shifting with the mathematical precision of a kinetic projectile. Hawks slammed into the pavement of a deserted plaza, rolling to his feet, and immediately launching a dozen feathers to form a protective perimeter. "Barnes, snap out of it. I know you're in there." The Winter Soldier landed 20 feet away. There was no roll to soften the impact, only the dull thud of reinforced joints absorbing the shock. He didn't respond to the name Barnes. To the entity standing in the plaza, James Buchanan Barnes was a ghost haunting the machinery. He reached behind his back, drawing a customized, high-caliber handgun provided by the HPSC earlier that day. He fired 3 rounds in less than a second. Hawks moved, his speed legendary, but the soldier hadn't aimed at where Hawks was. He aimed at where Hawks' wings would have to expand to take flight. One bullet grazed a primary feather, the impact sending a jolt of pain through Hawks' nervous system. Another shattered a nearby street lamp, showering the plaza in sparks. The third hit the ground an inch from Hawks' boot. "You're not even using a quirk," Hawks whispered, his breath hitching. "You're just predicting me." The soldier didn't give him time to philosophize. He closed the distance in a blur of motion. In the world of My Hero Academia, combat was often a series of special moves and shouted declarations. The Winter Soldier fought with the silence of a vacuum. He engaged Hawks in a brutal close-quarters exchange. Hawks used his 2 largest feathers as longswords, their edges sharp enough to cut through steel, but the soldier's vibranium arm was a universal answer. Every time Hawks swung, the metal arm was there, the clack hiss of metal on hardened keratin echoing through the square. The soldier caught one of the feather blades in his metal palm. He didn't try to pull it. He twisted. The blade snapped, and the feedback sent Hawks reeling. The soldier followed up with a spinning back kick that caught Hawks in the sternum, sending the number 2 hero crashing through the glass front of a closed cafe. "Stop!" A new voice commanded, stony, authoritative, and laced with a familiar exhaustion. From the roof of the cafe, a man draped in a capture weapon made of special carbon fibers dropped down. Shota Aizawa, known to the world as Eraserhead, stood between the hunter and the prey. His hair was floating, his eyes glowing a deep, menacing red. He looked at the Winter Soldier, his quirk active, his gaze locked onto the man with the metal arm. "I don't know what kind of villain enhancement you're using," Aizawa said, his voice a low rasp. "But your quirk is erased. Stand down, or I'll be forced to use." Aizawa stopped. He blinked, his eyes stinging, but he didn't look away. Usually, when he erased a quirk, the physical manifestations of it, the glowing eyes, the elemental aura, the physiological shifts, vanished or at least dampened, but the man in front of him didn't change. The metal arm remained silver. The cold, predatory intensity in his eyes didn't flicker. The soldier's stance didn't waver. The Winter Soldier tilted his head slightly, assessing the new combatant. Target, male. Weaponry, capture cloth. Power, ocular-based suppression. Threat level, high. Aizawa, get back, Hawks shouted, stumbling out of the ruins of the cafe, clutching his ribs. He's not a Supe. Erasure won't work on him. Aizawa's eyes widened. What do you mean he's not a... He didn't get to finish. The Winter Soldier lunged. Aizawa reacted with the instincts of a veteran, throwing his capture scarf forward to entangle the soldier's limbs. In a normal fight, this was the end. The scarf was stronger than steel and manipulated by Aizawa's own movements. But the soldier didn't struggle against the cloth. He allowed it to wrap around his vibranium arm, then he planted his feet and pulled. The sheer, raw strength of the super soldier serum, combined with the mechanical torque of the arm, was overwhelming. Aizawa, who weighed perhaps 180 pounds, was jerked forward like a rag doll. The soldier met him halfway, his human fist connecting with Aizawa's jaw in a short surgical strike. Aizawa's head snapped back, and for a moment, the world of the pro-hero went dark. The soldier didn't follow through with a kill. His programming was specific. Target Hawks. Objective, termination. He tossed the unconscious Aizawa aside like a piece of discarded equipment. You just took down Eraserhead like he was a child, Hawks said, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and horror. He looked at the man who had been his consultant only hours ago. He saw the way Bucky's human hand was perfectly still, devoid of the tremor that usually signaled his internal struggle. The League of Villains hadn't just broken Bucky, they had perfected him. They had given this world exactly what it claimed to want. A hero who was 100% efficient, who never doubted, and who never let feelings get in the way of the result. Is this it, Bucky? Hawks asked, standing tall even as his wings bled. Is this the shadow hero the Commission wanted? Someone who doesn't think? Someone who just follows the loudest voice? The soldier raised his pistol, his aim steady on Hawk's forehead. He didn't feel the irony. He didn't feel the tragedy. He felt the weight of the trigger. But as his finger began to squeeze, a massive explosion rocked the northern sector of Deka City. A pillar of blue flame, hotter and more violent than anything Endeavor produced, shot into the sky. The shockwave rattled the windows of the plaza. The soldier's head snapped toward the explosion. His internal processor flickered. Priority shift. Secondary objective. Secure League of Villains assets. New variable Dabby. Shigaraki's voice crackled through the soldier's hidden earpiece, the signal boosted by the League's tech. Change of plans, soldier. The Meta Liberation Army is making their move earlier than expected. The city is going to be a buffet of chaos. Forget the bird. Head to the central tower. We have a symbol to tear down, and I want you to be the one to hold the knife. The Winter Soldier lowered his weapon. He didn't look at Hawks. He didn't acknowledge the bleeding hero or the fallen teacher. He turned and sprinted toward the blue fire, his speed increasing until he was a blur of dark leather and silver light. Hawks collapsed to his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at Aizawa, who was starting to groan, then at the burning horizon. He realized then that the HPSC had made a catastrophic mistake. They thought they could control a weapon from another world by using the same methods they used on their own. But Bucky Barnes wasn't a product of their society. He was a survivor of a war they couldn't even imagine. And now, that war had come to Deka. Some things can't be fixed, Hawks whispered, echoing the cynicism he'd shared with Bucky. He looked at his broken feathers, but they sure as hell can be broken further. Deka City was no longer a municipality, it was a slaughterhouse. The Meta Liberation Army had risen, and the streets were a churning sea of meta abilities unleashed without restraint. Fire, ice, blades of bone, and torrents of liquid concrete collided in a cacophony of sectarian violence. In the center of this hurricane, the Winter Soldier moved like a scalpel through a fever. He didn't care about the liberation ideology, and he didn't care about the pro-hero's desperate attempts to contain the perimeter. He had a directive. He reached the central transmission tower, a spire of steel that served as the heartbeat of Deka's communication network. The building was guarded by a platoon of MLA elites, men and women who believed their quirks made them gods. To the Winter Soldier, they were just obstacles with predictable biometric signatures. He didn't use flashy attacks. He moved through the lobby with a silenced submachine gun in his right hand and the vibranium arm acting as a portable shield. Double tap to the chest, shield bash to the throat, dislocate the shoulder, move. He was a ghost of industrial-era violence haunting a digital-age war. He reached the server room on the 40th floor. The League of Villains wanted him to shut down the HPSC's backdoor surveillance, but as the soldier plugged his cybernetic interface into the terminal, the programming began to stutter. The League's trigger words had suppressed his personality, but they hadn't accounted for the HPSC's countermeasures. A localized signal, broadcasting from a hidden frequency, hit his internal receivers. It wasn't a command, it was a file. A high-priority, classified black document from the HPSC archives, triggered by his proximity to the tower's relay. On the screen of his mind, Bucky Barnes didn't see Shigaraki's scarred face or the Hydra star. He saw a woman. She was beautiful, in a way that felt sharp, like a glass shard. Her hair was a swirl of pink and blue, and her eyes held a weariness that Bucky recognized in his own reflection. Lady Nagant. The file played a series of audio logs, recorded by the previous president of the commission. Asset K92. Quirk. Rifle. Effective range. Unlimited. Subject has completed 47 sanitization missions. Target. A corrupt pro-hero. Target. A whistleblower. Target. A student with a dangerous quirk potential. The peace of society is maintained by the silence of the grave. The Winter Soldier's metal fingers spasmed, cracking the console. The HPSC hadn't brought him here to be a shadow hero. They had brought him here because their previous shadow had broken. Lady Nagant had realized that the commission wasn't protecting people. They were protecting the image of safety by murdering anyone who threatened the brand. She had turned her rifle on her handlers, and they had erased her from history, burying her in Tartarus. Barnes is the superior model, a voice, the current Madam President, whispered in a recorded memo from 3 days ago. Nagant had a conscience. That was her failure. Barnes has been conditioned for a century. He is a weapon that doesn't ask why. He is the perfect hero. He kills the villains we can't arrest, and the public never has to know. He is the peace we deserve. The clash of ideologies, the League's desire for chaos and the Commission's desire for a silent, murderous order, created a feedback loop in Bucky's brain. The red of the Winter Soldier's conditioning met the gold of the HPSC's corporate fascism. In the center of that psychic war, the man who had been Bucky Barnes felt a spark of pure, unadulterated rage. He wasn't a weapon. He wasn't a patch for their broken system. He was a man who had jumped onto a grenade in 1943 because it was the right thing to do. Longing, the soldier whispered, his own voice sounding foreign to him. Rusted. 17. He began to recite the words himself, but he wasn't submitting to them. He was taking them back. He was a super soldier. He had survived the fall. He had survived the chair. He had survived the blip. With a roar of agony, Bucky slammed his vibranium fist into his own temple. The impact was enough to shatter a normal man's skull, but for Bucky, it was a hard reset. The electrical discharge from the cybernetic arm surged into his neural interface, short-circuiting the League's trigger transmitter and the HPSC's monitoring chip in one agonizing burst of white light. The Winter Soldier fell to the floor, gasping. The glassy vacuum in his eyes vanished. The red receded. Bucky Barnes sat up, his human hand trembling, his metal hand smoking. He looked at the screen, at the face of Lady Nagant, the woman the system had broken. They're all the same, Bucky rasped, his voice thick with blood. Vought, Hydra, the Commission. It's just different logos on the same boot. The door to the server room blew inward, not from an explosion, but from a surge of raw, kinetic energy. Redestro, the leader of the Meta Liberation Army, stepped into the room. His skin was turning pitch black, the stress of the battle manifesting as a hulking, monstrous physical form. He looked at Bucky, then at the smoking terminal. A quirkless rat in my sanctuary, Redestro boomed, his voice echoing with the weight of his inherited burden. You are the ultimate symbol of the old world, soldier. A man made of scrap metal and ancient serums. You represent the shackling of the meta ability. You represent the regulation that has choked the life out of humanity. Bucky stood up slowly. He didn't have his gun. He didn't have his mask. He just had a century of trauma and a heavy metal arm. He looked at the monster in front of him. a man who thought his stress gave him the right to burn a city. And then he thought about the Commission, who thought their order gave them the right to create assassins. "You talk too much," Bucky said. He didn't use a plus ultra move. He didn't call out a name. He simply lunged. He was faster than Redestro expected, a blur of gray and silver. He dove under a massive, black-fisted swing that pulverized the server racks behind him. Bucky came up inside Redestro's guard, his vibranium arm vibrating at a high frequency. He delivered a three-punch combination: solar plexus, throat, jaw. The sound was like a jackhammer on granite. Redestro didn't budge, but his stress armor flickered. "Is that all, Quirkless? You think your toys can match the power of my conviction?" "I don't have conviction," Bucky hissed, catching Redestro's massive thumb and snapping it back with a sickening pop. "I just have a mission, and my mission just changed." He grabbed a severed power cable from the ruined terminal, the copper wires sparking with thousands of volts of electricity. He wrapped it around his vibranium arm and plunged the fist directly into Redestro's chest. The metal acted as a conductor, funneling the city's power grid directly into the villain's heart. Redestro's eyes went wide as the electrical surge overrode his nervous system. The stress began to leak out of him like steam from a broken pipe. Bucky didn't let go until the smell of ozone and burning flesh filled the room. He shoved the gasping, depowered leader of the MLA to the floor. Bucky stood over him, the blue light of the dying servers reflecting in his cold, weary eyes. "The Commission wanted me to be their Nagant," Bucky said, looking at the city burning through the window. "The League wanted me to be their monster. But I think I'll just be the one who tells the truth." He walked to the window and looked out. The HPSC was already sending more heroes to save the city and cover up the mess. He could see the lights of the news helicopters. He realized that as long as the system remained, there would always be another Nagant, another Winter Soldier. He didn't run, he didn't hide, he waited. Because some things can't be fixed, but you can sure as hell make them honest. The descent from the transmission tower was a journey through a landscape of broken glass and shattered ideals. Bucky Barnes stepped out into the streets of Dyka City, but the air no longer felt like a city. It felt like a war zone he had walked through 1,000 times before. The smoke was thicker now, a greasy black shroud that tasted of plastic and burnt hair. Through the haze, the neon signs of hero agencies flickered and died, replaced by the orange glow of uncontrolled fires. This was the moment where the hero society was supposed to shine, where the symbols of justice were meant to descend from the heavens and save the innocent. But as Bucky moved through the wreckage, he didn't see heroism, he saw the sanitization he had read about in the HPSC files. A squad of pro-heroes, men and women Bucky recognized from the ranking charts, were moving through a residential block. They weren't fighting villains, they were clearing the area. Bucky watched from the shadows of a collapsed storefront as a hero, with a crystalline mutation, pinned an MLA member against a wall. The man was unarmed, his hands raised in surrender, his face bloodied. "The script says you didn't surrender," the hero said, his voice flat and devoid of the theatricality he usually displayed on talk shows. "The script says, the Meta-Liberation Army fought to the last man, necessitating a lethal response to protect the public." A spike of crystal erupted from the hero's palm, driving through the man's throat. There was no trial. There was no due process. There was only the maintenance of a narrative. The hero turned to a nearby camera drone, his expression shifting instantly into one of weary, noble resolve. "Area secured. The threat to our peaceful society has been neutralized. Plus ultra." Bucky felt a cold, familiar bile rise in his throat. He had seen this in Berlin. He had seen it in the shadows of the Cold War. It was the banality of corporate-sponsored murder. To the world, these were heroes. To the man with the metal arm, they were just another hit squad with better branding. A scream cut through the sound of crackling fire, high-pitched, desperate, and young. Bucky didn't think, he reacted. He vaulted over a pile of rubble and sprinted toward a crumbling apartment complex. The structure had been hit by a stray blast from a liberation extremist, and the upper floors were pancaking. In the lobby, a mother was pinned under a fallen support beam, her arm reaching toward her son, a boy no older than 6, who was staring in terror at a group of MLA survivors. The survivors were desperate, their quirks flickering as they searched for a way out. One of them, a man whose skin was covered in serrated blades, lunged for the boy, looking for a hostage. Bucky arrived like a thunderbolt. He didn't use a quirk. He didn't shout a slogan. He caught the Blade Man midair with his vibranium hand, the metal fingers crushing the serrated bone into powder. With a brutal, short-arc swing, he tossed the man into his comrades, the impact sounding like a bag of wet gravel hitting a wall. Before the other extremists could recover, Bucky was at the support beam. His human hand gripped the edge, his muscles screaming under the strain. His vibranium arm hissed, the internal servos whining as he channeled every ounce of the super soldier serum into a single lift. The 1,000-pound beam groaned, then rose. "Go!" Bucky rasped, his teeth gritted. The mother scrambled out, clutching her son. She looked up at Bucky, not with gratitude, but with the same wide-eyed terror she had for the villains. She saw the blood on his face, the cold, mechanical glint of his arm, and the hollow, haunted look in his eyes. To her, he wasn't a hero. He was just another monster in a night full of them. She grabbed her son and fled into the smoke without a word. Bucky dropped the beam, the impact shaking the floor. He stood in the ruins of the lobby, alone, as the structure groaned above him. He realized then that in this world, there was no room for a man like him. You were either a branded savior or a categorized villain. There was no middle ground for a soldier trying to do the right thing without a license. "You should have stayed in the tower, Barnes." A voice drifted through the dust. Hawks landed in the doorway. He looked worse for wear. His primary feathers were singed, his jacket was torn, and he was leaning heavily on his left side. He looked at the bodies of the MLA members Bucky had neutralized. Then at Bucky, there was no warmth in his gaze, only a deep, professional cynicism. "The Commission is declaring this whole sector a black zone," Hawks said. "Anyone found inside who isn't a licensed hero is being classified as an MLA collaborator. They're bringing in the heavy hitters to wipe the slate clean. They can't have the truth of this uprising getting out. It makes the symbol of peace era look like a fluke. The truth is that your heroes are executing people who surrendered," Bucky said, stepping over the rubble. "The truth is that the Commission is just another version of Hydra with better PR." Hawks flinched at the name. Though he didn't know its history, he knew enough of the tone. Maybe. But Hydra, or whatever they are, keep the lights on. They keep the stock market from crashing. They keep the little kids from realizing that their idols are just people with high-functioning narcissism and a government paycheck. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, encrypted drive. "I saw what you did in the server room. I saw you break the League's code. The Commission thinks you're still compromised. They've authorized your termination to prevent a security leak." "And you?" Bucky asked, his hand hovering over his combat knife. "Are you here to follow orders?" Hawks looked at the drive, then at the sky, where the news helicopters were circling like vultures. "I'm tired, Barnes. I'm tired of being the one who has to kill the good people to save the bad system." He tossed the drive to Bucky. "That's the encryption key for the HPSC's deep state archives. Everything. Nagant's missions, the Quirk breeding programs, the assassinations. If you can get that to a broadcast station outside the black zone, the narrative breaks. The heroes become what they are. Employees. Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I can't do it," Hawk said, his wings drooping. "I'm a product of the system. I'm built to fly in the cage. You're an outsider. You've already lost everything. You're the only one who can afford to tell the truth." A massive roar shook the foundations of the building. It wasn't human, and it wasn't a quirk. It was the sound of something biological and engineered. Through the shattered windows, Bucky saw a massive, black-skinned creature plummet from a transport jet. It was covered in exposed musculature, with a bird-like beak and eyes that held no intelligence, only a void of programmed violence. "A high-end Nomu," Hawks whispered, his face going pale. "The Commission's final solution for the Daika cleanup. They aren't just here to kill villains, Bucky. They're here to kill anyone who can talk." Bucky pocketed the drive and looked at the monster. It was a bioweapon. It was a winter soldier made of flesh instead of metal. He looked at Hawks, then at the burning city. He knew the odds. He knew that even if he survived, the world would still see him as the villain. "Some things can't be fixed," Bucky said, the silver star on his shoulder catching the light of the fires. "But they sure as hell can be fought." He didn't wait for a reply. He ran toward the beast, a man without a quirk, a man without a country, and a man who was finally, for the first time in a century, choosing his own war. The high-end Nomu didn't land. It colonized the space it occupied. When its feet hit the cracked asphalt of Deka City, the shockwave shattered every remaining window within a 2-block radius. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, a mountain of hypertrophied muscle and exposed gray brain matter, its skin a bruised purple-black that seemed to swallow the light of the fires. It had 6 eyes, all blinking independently, and a maw of jagged, serrated teeth that dripped a corrosive black bile. This was the pinnacle of the HPSC's secret collaboration with the darker corners of Quirk science, a biological weapon that possessed the strength of a titan, the speed of a jet, and the regenerative capacity of a cancer. Bucky Barnes stood 30 feet away, a ghost in tactical leather. He didn't have a cape to flutter in the wind. He didn't have a quirk to manifest. He just had his training, his arm, and a cold, focused clarity that the creature before him would never understand. To the world, the Nomu was a god of destruction. To Bucky, it was a mirror. It was a man stripped of his name, his memories, and his agency, rebuilt into a tool of state-sponsored violence. It was the Winter Soldier, perfected and purged of the weakness of humanity. Target identified, the Nomu croaked, its voice sounding like grinding stones. James, Buchanan, Barnes, erase, the leak. The creature didn't move so much as it vanished. It was a blur of raw kinetic energy. Bucky's super soldier reflexes, honed by a century of combat, were the only reason his head remained on his shoulders. He threw himself into a low roll, the Nomu's fist whistling through the air where his chest had been a millisecond before. The sheer air pressure of the punch cracked the brickwork behind him. Bucky didn't wait for the follow-up. He came up from the roll with his HPSC sidearm, emptying the magazine into the Nomu's exposed brain. The high-caliber rounds tore through the gray matter, sending splatters of black ichor onto the pavement. In a normal being, it would have been an instant kill. In the Nomu, the wounds closed before the brass casings even hit the ground. The creature didn't even flinch. It swung a massive, mutated arm, a quirk called spring-like limbs, and the limb elongated with the force of a hydraulic piston. Bucky raised his vibranium arm, bracing for the impact. The collision sounded like a wrecking ball hitting a vault door. The metal absorbed the majority of the energy, but the sheer force sent Bucky skidding back 50 feet, his boots carving deep furrows into the asphalt. His human shoulder dislocated with a sickening pop. Bucky didn't scream. He gritted his teeth, slammed his shoulder against a standing lamppost to reset the joint, and inhaled a ragged breath. Regeneration is the problem, Bucky muttered to himself. Can't outshoot it. Can't outpunch it. Have to outthink it. The Nomu lunged again, its heels erupting with pressurized air. A jet quirk. It was a mindless, overwhelming assault. Bucky moved through the wreckage of a nearby construction site, weaving between iron girders and stacks of industrial rebar. He was a fox, leading a wolf into a trap. He used his combat knife to slice through the high-tension cables holding a massive load of steel pipes. The pipes cascaded down, a ton of metal slamming onto the Nomu. It was a temporary distraction, but it gave Bucky the 3 seconds he needed. He sprinted toward a nearby power transformer, his vibranium arms sparking as he tore the casing open. He grabbed the heavy-duty conductive leads, the current surging through his cybernetic hand. "Over here, you ugly son of a bitch," Bucky roared. The Nomu erupted from the pile of pipes, its skin shredded, but already knitting back together. It let out a piercing, sonic shriek, and charged, its claws extended. Bucky didn't dodge. He waited until the creature was inches away, then he lunged forward, plunging the electrified power leads directly into the Nomu's open mouth, while simultaneously slamming his vibranium fist into its chest. The result was a catastrophic discharge of energy. Thousands of volts funneled through the Nomu's nervous system, causing its muscles to spasm and lock. At the same time, Bucky triggered the kinetic discharge feature of his arm, a trick he'd learned from T'Challa's tech. All the energy the arm had absorbed from the Nomu's previous hits was released in a single, focused blast of vibrational force. The Nomu's chest cavity imploded. The shockwave blew the creature backward, its body trailing smoke and arcs of blue electricity. It slammed into a concrete pylon, pinned by the force of the discharge. For the first time, its regeneration faltered. The electrical interference was playing havoc with its multiple quirk factors, creating a biological feedback loop. Bucky stood his ground, his tactical suit smoking, his breath coming in heavy, pained heaves. He looked at the Nomu, And for a second, he saw the face of the man it used to be. A blank, hollowed-out shell. "You're not a hero," Bucky said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "And you're not a villain. You're just a tragedy. I'm doing you a favor." He pulled a thermite grenade from his belt, the last one he had. He didn't throw it. He walked up to the twitching, convulsing monster and jammed the grenade into the center of its exposed brain. He pulled the pin and turned away. The explosion wasn't loud, but it was hot. A localized sun that burned at 4,000 degrees. The thermite melted through the Nomu's skull, incinerating the regenerative core before the cells could even register the damage. The creature let out one last distorted wail before collapsing into a heap of charred bone and ash. Bucky didn't look back at the fire. He looked at his metal hand. It was scorched, the silver finish blackened by the heat. He was exhausted, his body a map of bruises and internal bleeding. He felt the weight of the encryption key in his pocket, the truth that could burn down the world of pro-heroes. He looked up at the sky. The HPSC transport jets were circling lower now. They would have seen the fight. They would know that their perfected weapon had been destroyed by a defective relic. He could hear the sirens of the local police and the distant shouts of the Class 1A students who had been caught in the crossfire of the city's collapse. He saw a young boy with green hair and a look of pure, agonizing determination, helping a civilian out of the rubble. Bucky realized that the boy represented the lie. He believed in the symbol. He believed that if he worked hard enough and stayed pure enough, the system would love him back. Bucky knew better. He knew that the system didn't love. It consumed. He had the key. He had the truth. But as he looked at the boy, Bucky realized that exposing the HPSC wouldn't just destroy the corrupt, it would destroy the hope of the innocent. It was the same choice he'd faced 100 times before. Save the world by breaking it, or protect the dream by living in the nightmare. "Some things can't be fixed," Bucky whispered, his voice disappearing into the wind. He turned away from the light of the fires and melted into the shadows of the industrial district. He wasn't going to the broadcast station. He was going to the one place where a ghost could truly disappear. The Winter Soldier was gone. But James Buchanan Barnes still had work to do. The sun rose over Deka City not with the triumphant warmth of a new era, but with a pale, sickly light that struggled to pierce the hanging shroud of ash and chemical fire. By 6 a.m., the HPSC's PR machine was already in high gear. On every digital billboard that hadn't been shattered, the image of Endeavor and a fleet of top-tier pro-heroes played on a loop. The headline was consistent across every news banner. Heroic defense of Deka, unlicensed vigilante, and Mala terrorist neutralized. The narrative had been scrubbed clean. There was no mention of the high-end Nomu, no mention of the executions in the streets, and certainly no mention of the man with the metal arm who had saved the sector from total collapse. Bucky Barnes sat in the corner of a rusted subway car, the last train out of the district before the total military blockade. He was hunched over, his hood pulled low, his vibranium arm tucked into a sling made from a discarded MLA banner. Every joint in his body felt like it had been fused with hot lead, and his human hand was stained with a mixture of grease and dried ichor that refused to wash off. Across from him, a small television screen mounted to the subway ceiling showed an interview with the HPSC president. She looked perfect, her hair pristine, her expression one of practiced, maternal grief. "It is a tragedy when those without the discipline of a license take the law into their own hands," she said, her voice smooth and comforting. "The individual known as the Ghost was a symptom of the chaos we fight every day. While we mourn the loss of life, we celebrate the triumph of our regulated society." Bucky looked down at the encrypted drive in his hand. It felt heavier than a grenade. With a single upload, he could reveal the president's involvement in the Nomu project. He could show the world the records of Lady Nagant's assassinations. He could tear the symbol of peace ideology out by its roots, and watch the world of pro-heroes burn in the fires of public outrage. The subway doors opened at a quiet station on the outskirts of Musutafu. Bucky stepped out, his boots clicking rhythmically on the tile. He found himself walking toward a small park where a statue of All Might stood, a younger version of the hero, frozen in a pose of impossible strength, and a smile that promised everything would be okay. "You're late for the revolution, Barnes," a voice whispered from the shadows of a cherry blossom tree. Hawk stepped out. He wasn't in his hero gear. He was wearing a plain hoodie and sunglasses, his wings hidden under a bulky trench coat. He looked like a ghost of himself, his movements stiff and pained. He leaned against the base of the statue, looking up at All Might's face. "The Commission is looking for you," Hawks said, not looking at Bucky. "They've put a shoot-on-sight order on your file. They're telling the public you're a Quirk tech thief from a hostile foreign power. They've even got a Supe team specializing in cybernetic suppression, tracking your arm's frequency." "I changed the frequency," Bucky said. "And I have the drive." Hawks finally looked at him, his eyes hidden behind the dark lenses. "I know. I saw the upload ping when you accessed the tower. Why haven't you hit send?" "You could be the man who killed the gods, Bucky. You could be free." Bucky walked up to the statue, tracing the cold bronze of the hero's boot. "I spent 70 years being the man who broke things. I know what happens when you destroy a symbol without having something to put in its place. You don't get freedom. You get a vacuum. And in a vacuum, the worst kind of people, the Shigarakis and the Hydras, are the only ones who know how to breathe." He looked at Hawks, his gaze unflinching. "If I release this, the kids who think they can be heroes, kids like that boy I saw in the ruins, they lose everything. They lose the only reason they have to be good. The Commission is a monster, but the lie they've built is the only thing keeping this city from eating itself." Hawks let out a short, bitter laugh. "So what? We just let them win? We let them keep making Nomus and Nagants?" "No," Bucky said. He held up the drive. "I'm not releasing it, but I'm not destroying it either. I'm going to keep it. And every time the Commission thinks about crossing the line, every time they think about sanitizing a witness or building a new monster, they're going to remember that I'm out there. I'm the ghost in their machine. I'm the one person they can't license, can't buy, and can't find." Hawks stood up straight, his wings rustling under his coat. "You're going to be a shadow, a vigilante with a nuke in his pocket." "I'm a soldier," Bucky corrected, "and a soldier's job isn't always to win the war. Sometimes, it's just to make sure the other side is too afraid to fight it." He turned and began to walk away, heading toward the industrial heart of the city, where a man without a quirk could blend in with the laborers and the forgotten. He had no home, no country, and no name that wouldn't bring a strike team to his door. He was back where he started, a weapon with a soul, operating in the dark. "Barnes!" Hawks called out. Bucky stopped but didn't turn around. "What happens when they eventually catch you? What happens when you can't keep the secret anymore?" Bucky looked at his metal hand, the silver star glinting in the morning sun. He thought about the chair, the ice, and the long, bloody road that had brought him to this world of false idols. He thought about the boy with the green hair, and the mother he had saved who was too afraid to say thank you. "Then I'll do what I've always done," Bucky said, his voice steady and cold. "I'll fight until there's nothing left. Because in this world, or any other, some things can't be fixed, but you can sure as hell make them pay for breaking them." He stepped into the crowd of commuters, his hood up, his presence vanishing, as he became just another face in a society that refused to see him. The Winter Soldier was a memory. Bucky Barnes was a myth. And, in the high towers of the HPSC, the president sat in her office, looking at a blank screen, waiting for a signal that would never come. Haunted by the knowledge that for the first time in history, the Commission didn't own the shadow. Conclusion. The Deka incident faded from the news cycles within a week, replaced by fluff pieces on hero fashion and the upcoming school festivals. The Hero Public Safety Commission maintained its grip on the narrative, but a permanent chill had settled within their walls. Every executive, every handler, and every corrupt pro-hero now operated with the nagging sensation of a red dot on their forehead. They had tried to manufacture the perfect, obedient soldier, and instead, they had introduced a permanent consequence into their playground. Bucky Barnes remained in the periphery, a quirkless ghost haunting the gray spaces of Japan. He didn't join the League, and he didn't join the heroes. He became the silent check on a system that had forgotten accountability. He watched the students of UA with a mixture of pity and hope, knowing that their idealism would eventually collide with the reality he guarded. In a world obsessed with quirks and celebrity, the most powerful force was now a man who possessed neither, only a metal arm and the truth. The HPSC had wanted a shadow hero to protect their peace. They got a Winter Soldier to remind them of their sins.